So the channel A Bit of Orange took Ryan George's pitch meeting style and twisted it into an abomination that pushes science denial. Let's see how the pitch meeting that he envisioned would have probably actually gone down.
So, Charles Darwin, you have a scientific theory for me?
Yes, I do. It's called the theory of evolution.
Evolution, doesn't that just mean change?
Well, in a colloquial sense, yes, it does mean any change over time, but
So your theory is that things change.
yes, though this is focused on biology and
Is there anyone arguing that things don't change, thus necessitating this theory?
there's that idea that Lamarck had about species being immutable and unchanging, but the data I have shows...
I mean, change over time is a redundant idea, since merely being in time means to change.
Well, yeah, but this explains how life changes over time.
Sure, everything in the universe is getting older, and then there's the law of entropy.
That's not at all what I mean. Also, Lord Kelvin weighed in on this, and the laws of thermodynamics don't apply to this theory.
If the point of your book is just to say that things happen, well, it's certainly true, but hardly worth saying.
Yeah, about that. Can we get back to the book? I feel like you didn't read the manuscript I sent you. In fact, is that the manuscript in your inbox still? It looks like it's gathering a fine layer of dust. That would explain these weird questions you're asking, but I don't think you understand what this theory actually explains.
Oh no?
No, like I said earlier, it's an explanation about how life changes over time.
Like when I get a haircut.
No, not like when you get a haircut. I'm talking about changes in reproductive populations over successive generations.
Like when the dodos went extinct.
I think you're drifting a bit on me. Extinctions aren't the whole picture here.
But going extinct is a change.
Yeah, it is a change, but there's more to this than you're actually apparently aware of.
Maybe you should just tell me about your book.
Yeah, let's get to that. It's called On the Origin of Species by Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life.
Okay. So, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life.
Yeah.
Is that the title or the first chapter?
The title. Yes, I know it's long, but we are differentiating evolution in the everyday colloquial sense from biology, where this will be applicable by describing how the diversity of life we see came to be and continues to grow.
Like the book of Genesis?
No, not like the book of Genesis. In the Bible, things were created by inexplicable magical miracles, which, as you know, hopefully, fall outside the purview of science. The theory of evolution shows that Lamarck's discovery of a branching tree pattern of relatedness that he couldn't explain can be explained and accounted for by descent from common ancestors.
But then, where did the first life come from?
Yeah, evolutionary theory doesn't cover that because of the need for an ancestor-descendant relationship. Where life came from is being looked into by another group of scientists, and we are not in any way affiliated. My work doesn't affect them, and theirs doesn't affect mine. My part is explaining how life diversifies over time, not where life came from. So you'll need to talk to some of my colleagues that are actually looking into that, but it isn't part of the theory of evolution.
So this title, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. You're saying that natural selection is the means by which species originate.
Yes, that's right.
What is natural selection?
Natural selection is the mechanism by which those better suited to an environment from any batch of siblings in a given generation are better able to reproduce and pass on those traits to the next generation, which will then be better able to do the same in turn. Those that don't have those traits have a harder time or die before they can reproduce.
And
the process continues with the inheritors of beneficial traits being better able to reproduce and pass on those traits again.
So, natural selection is when environmental stressors cause those differences to allow some to survive while others die.
The environment doesn't cause the changes are affected by environmental factors. Aside from that, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but yes.
But how does this make a new species?
As those beneficial traits I told you about earlier get passed from generation to generation, the differences they cause build up. Take the finches on the Galapagos Islands. They are quite obviously related to one another, but the changes they went through affected their sizes and their beak shapes in particular, making some more suited to certain food sources on the island they inhabit. One species might be better suited for cracking nuts, while another might specialize in finding grubs and worms, with the beak shape reflective of the niche that they fill. Since one of the variations in each generation is beak size and shape, those better suited to a certain food supply would have an easier time accessing that food than a sibling. Thus, natural selection favors the one better suited to the needs imposed by the environment, eventually leading to those that feed on similar food sources being more viable mating partners and passing on the advantage they both share, which becomes dominant in that population. If the population stays separate from the ancestral group for long enough, they won't show any interest in breeding with any finches outside of their group under normal circumstances, and that is when a new species is formed. You've been nodding this whole time, but from the glazed look in your eyes, I think I lost you somewhere. What was the last thing you remember me talking about?
I thought you were saying that natural selection is the means by which species originate.
Yeah, that's what I've been describing to you.
But in the book, you're saying it just reduces the variation of population by killing some?
No. The ones that die out were not suited to some environmental factor, but the ones that are able to reproduce pass on those advantageous traits that they had to the next generation, which then continue the process, eventually building up those changes to result in the formation of new species descended from the ancestral stock, which appear superficially different, like the finches that I was telling you about.
How does killing off a variation in the population cause the origin of a new species? The fit ones were already there.
The ones that were fit for the environment are the ones that were able to more easily adapt to a particular niche, while the others failed to do so. The ancestral stock doesn't have to go extinct for the new variety to emerge. The new variety finds a specialization it can use to better compete or outcompete its ancestral group, while the ancestors can be generalized enough to get by. Both groups can and often do survive, with one simply being better equipped to handle something that the other is barely adequate at. There are those that come from a group that is fit but don't compete as well and are subsequently weeded out. It is this process that favors the traits best suited to the environment, and once the group mates exclusively with those that share that niche, a new species is formed.
Oh, okay.
Now that we're on the same page, the important thing to take away from this is that tiny changes build up over successive generations in the population. Those changes are what bring about new species, with no requirement that the ancestral group die, and the ancestral group as a whole can change as well, with those that are a better fit to the environment being better able to survive.
Why are we calling it survival of the fittest when your theory admits that less fit members will survive too?
Did Herbert Spencer call you? I don't call it survival of the fittest. That rat bastard took this idea and applied it to socioeconomic and political constructs, which evolution theory was never meant to be applied to. Like I said, it's an aspect of biology.
Fair enough.
This theory is only meant to address how new species can form from beneficial changes being passed down in reproductive populations over successive generations. Descent with inherited modification.
Wow. And how many new species have you observed coming into being?
Well, we are talking about several generations being needed for such a thing to happen. As a result, it is difficult to witness directly.
So it literally can't be observed?
I didn't say that. It can be observed, it just takes quite a bit of time. The faster a group reproduces, the faster the process is, so we have to observe things that reproduce at a faster rate in order to see it.
But it's a scientific theory. Shouldn't it be based on scientific observations?
Yes, it is, and yes, it is based on scientific observations. That said, based on the evidence Linnaeus discovered in his investigations based on morphology alone, we can make predictions based on what we should expect to find if the theory is true. Like Thomas Huxley, who has this idea that birds are descended from dinosaurs. If such a thing is true, we should expect to find a feathered dinosaur with unfused wing fingers, since all birds have their fingers fused into one structure. Von Baer was also able to show an interesting similarity of organisms in embryo, including bird embryos having fingers that later fuse in their development. Some quarrymen found exactly that. It's called Archaeopteryx, and it has the unfused wing fingers and feather imprints in its fossil. Exactly what we should expect to find if this theory is correct. It's the first of what will turn out to be countless others, I'm sure.
What about the rest of your theory?
I'm not following. What do you mean by the rest of the theory?
So your theory intends to teach people how an unguided natural process that removes variation creates new species.
I thought we were on the same page here. Yes, some variation is removed in the process, but the ones that reproduce successfully pass on the beneficial traits. This is actually super easy. You're turning this into a big inconvenience.
So nature makes new species that didn't exist by killing off members of a species that already exist.
And the ones that survive pass on the traits that made them successful. The next generation passes those traits on, and so on down the line until they change too much physically to mate or show no interest in others outside of their population, forming a new species. Don't forget that part.
How does nature add by subtracting?
It's like I'm talking to a wall. The ones suited for an environmental niche can take over that niche. The ancestral group does not have to die for that to happen. Like I said, they can be generalized in multiple niches and be adequate in all of them. A jack of all trades, if you will. But to specialize in one area, they will have to give up the ability to utilize some other niche.
Fair enough.
You said that before, but I honestly can't tell if you're following me here or if you just like saying that to move the conversation along. So, about publishing on the origin of species. Are you on board with that?
Well, since this is a book proposing a scientific theory which can never be observed, for which there is no evidence, and whose content disproves its own title, and whose substance requires you to believe that nature can add by subtracting, it might be hard to get people who are interested in science to buy it.
Oh my god, you literally haven't heard or understood a single thing I said.
How so?
Well, let's recap, and I need you to focus. I need you to stay right here, okay? Good. Natural selection is the process by which those individuals in a population are either better suited or not for a variety of environmental factors. Those that are not suited die off. Those that are reach maturity and are able to reproduce, passing on those beneficial traits to subsequent generations. Those generations repeat the process until you wind up with, like my example of the Galapagos finches, a group that has changed physically enough to specialize in a particular niche with no requirement that the ancestral group die off in the process. By mating exclusively with others that share that niche, you get a new species. Obviously related to the ancestors, they are now new and different, with one species becoming 2, 4, 8, 16, and so on, with the exception of lines that don't work out so well going extinct. But you are still getting more variations and more diversity of life. That is why there are 14 species of finch on the Galapagos now. Evolution only covers how life diversifies over time, not where it came from or how it formed. That is a separate field of study, not connected with the theory of evolution in any way. Now, there is already sufficient evidence in morphology and embryology alone. The fossil record is already revealing transitional forms that have been predicted as well. I feel that's enough to support this theory, so I say we publish. What do you say?
Okay.
Fantastic, let's do that.